In the endless flow of time, there are moments when nature not only displays breathtaking grandeur that captivates the heart, but also reveals terrifying destructive power etched deep into humanity's collective memory. And in late 2019, a continent renowned for its unique landscapes, peculiar wildlife, and one of the world's most diverse ecosystems, Australia, faced one of the darkest and most tragic moments in its modern history. It wasn't just an event. It was a painful cry from Mother Nature, a warning we can never forget. What seemed like an apocalyptic scenario only seen in movies became a harsh reality. Millions of hectares of forests ablaze, transforming lush eucalyptus forests and thriving wildlife sanctuaries into seas of fire and then into ashes. An environmental catastrophe of unprecedented scale left a deep scar not only on the parched land, but also in the souls of millions of Australians, spreading shock and anxiety to every corner of the planet. This was not merely a bushfire. It was a vivid, painful testament to our fragility before nature's boundless power, and a reminder of the immeasurable consequences of climate change. To truly comprehend the devastating scale and terrifying spread of this disaster, we need to step back a little to look at the broader picture of what transpired before the ferocious flames erupted. For many years, even before the first spark ignited, Australia had been gripped by a prolonged, persistent, and unprecedented drought. Rivers ran dry, lakes shrank, and the land cracked under the scorching sun. Eucalyptus forests, inherently flammable due to their oil content, became even drier, brittle as straw. Every leaf, every branch a potential fuse, waiting for just a small spark to ignite fiercely. And then, the grim year of 2019 arrived, marking the climax of that prolonged dry spell. This year went down in Australian history as the hottest on record. Average temperatures soared to record highs, at times exceeding 40 degrees Celsius in many areas, making the air stifling, oppressive, and difficult to breathe. But it didn't stop there. Nature further tested human resilience with powerful, whipping winds, sweeping away everything in their path. The terrifying combination of prolonged drought, extreme temperatures, and strong winds created a perfect formula, a worst-case scenario for an inevitable bushfire catastrophe. Initially, everything seemed to be just scattered bushfires, not too unusual for Australia's dry season, a phenomenon that locals were all too familiar with and frequently had to contend with. From September 2019, the first fires began to ignite, primarily in the states of New South Wales and Queensland, vast regions with immense forests. However, very quickly, experts and firefighters realized something terrifying. These fires were not behaving like ordinary blazes. The flames spread unusually fast, at a horrifying pace, exceeding all predictions, and the control capabilities of even the most experienced firefighting teams, those accustomed to battling the fire enemy. Strong winds relentlessly pushed the flames further, carrying hot embers for miles, unexpectedly creating new fire fronts. Extreme temperatures parched all vegetation in its path, turning every bush, every tree trunk into a potential fuse, ready to ignite in an instant. Small fires, initially seemingly harmless, began to merge, devouring vast spaces, creating much larger, more powerful, and far more terrifying blazes. They were no longer isolated red dots on a map. They were gradually transforming into colossal fire monsters, roaring and mercilessly consuming everything in their path. With each passing day, the situation spiraled further out of control. Thick smoke and dust blanketed the sky, turning the sunlight into a gloomy orange hue, signaling that something terrible was about to unfold. Australians began to feel the scorching, suffocating breath of impending destruction, a pervasive sense of helplessness and fear. And then, in November and December 2019, a new dark chapter, a true nightmare, began. The seemingly separate scattered fires merged into a megafire, a horrifying phenomenon the world had never witnessed. It was then that Australia's clear blue sky, a symbol of peace and beauty, began to change color, stained a brilliant red, signaling an approaching firestorm, a tragedy no one could have foreseen. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. In the final months of 2019, particularly November and December, the seemingly isolated small fires, which had appeared as mere scattered outbreaks everywhere, were no longer separate. They began to merge, devouring one another, forming a colossal megafire, a phenomenon humanity had never witnessed on such a terrifying scale and intensity. It wasn't merely a large bushfire. It was a true firestorm, a self-generating weather system born from the flames themselves with temperatures so extreme they could create fire tornadoes, unleash dry lightning, and propel colossal smoke plumes into the atmosphere, obscuring even the sun. The heat from this firestorm was unimaginable. It incinerated everything in its path in an instant, reducing centuries-old trees to ash, melting metal, and vitrifying rock. Australians, accustomed to nature's harshness, now faced an unprecedented adversary. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and ash. The sky, once clear blue and a symbol of beauty and peace, was now stained a brilliant red, a fierce burning orange, as if the entire world was submerged in an eternal, menacing twilight. In major cities like Sydney and the capital Canberra, home to millions, the scene became surreal and terrifying. The sky turned a deep, ominous red, and black ash fell like fine rain everywhere, casting a gloomy pall over everything. Air quality plummeted to life-threatening levels, far exceeding all permissible standards. People were forced to wear medical masks when outdoors, an image we would later become familiar with for a different reason. But at that time, it symbolized helplessness against nature's destructive power. Many schools had to close, and hospitals were overwhelmed by a sudden surge in patients suffering from respiratory illnesses. Daily life was completely disrupted. All activities seemed to halt, giving way to unease. As the fires roared closer to coastal towns, thousands of residents became trapped, unable to evacuate by road. In that desperate moment, the Royal Australian Navy carried out one of the largest evacuations in the country's history. Warships, originally designed for other purposes, now became life-saving ferries, navigating through thick smoke and rough seas to bring thousands of people to safety. The image of these ships laden with people against a backdrop of a fiery red sky would forever be etched into the memories of those who witnessed it, a testament to human compassion and resilience in adversity. But the cost of this catastrophe was immeasurable. Millions, perhaps billions, of wild animals were cruelly incinerated or lost their habitats forever. Images of severely burned koalas, kangaroos fleeing the flames, or barren eucalyptus forests devoid of birdsong brought tears to the eyes of the world. It was not merely a loss of individual lives, but a grave threat to Australia's unique biodiversity. Alongside this, thousands of homes, the sanctuaries of countless families, were completely destroyed, reduced to piles of ash. Dreams, memories, lifelong savings, all vanished in an instant. And most painfully, there was the noble sacrifice of brave firefighters. They were silent heroes, battling the fire enemy day and night, despite the lurking dangers. Many of them perished, leaving behind shattered families and the boundless grief of an entire nation. The 2019 to 2020 Australian bushfire disaster was not merely an environmental event. It was a deep scar on the soul of a nation, a painful reminder of life's fragility and nature's destructive power when pushed to its limits. It exposed the vulnerabilities in our approach to climate change and raised urgent questions about the future of this planet. And then, as 2019 drew to a close amidst a sea of fire and smoke, a fragile glimmer of hope emerged. In early 2020, after months of extreme drought, heavy rains finally poured down. It was a release, a divine grace that the entire nation had prayed for. Each raindrop seemed to soothe the scorched earth, each stream of water to extinguish the ravaging flames. The image of exhausted firefighters standing in the rain, their faces smudged but their eyes filled with relief, spoke volumes. The rain not only put out the fires but also brought a moment of peace, a chance to breathe a sigh of relief after an intensely stressful period. However, that relief was only temporary. Although the rains helped control and eventually extinguish the major fires, the consequences of the disaster remained stark and heartbreaking. The raindrops could not wash away the ashes of millions of hectares of forest, nor could they bring life back to the billions of creatures lost, or soothe the pain of families who had lost everything. The post-fire landscape was a desolate scene, charred, bare eucalyptus trees reaching skyward amidst a land reduced to gray ash, devoid of birdsong, devoid of any sign of the animals that once lived there. It was an eerie silence, a testament to the unimaginable destructive power of the fire enemy. It was during those post-disaster months, when the pain and loss became clearer than ever, that a fierce debate erupted, not only in Australia but spreading across the world. The question posed was not who caused the fires, as most were due to natural causes and extreme climatic conditions, but rather, why did the disaster become so severe, and what can we do to prevent its recurrence? At the heart of this debate was the issue of climate change. One side argued that this was an unavoidable consequence of years of prolonged drought and the extreme weather conditions that Australia has always faced. They emphasized natural factors and the importance of effective forest management. But the other side, armed with undeniable scientific evidence, strongly asserted that human-induced climate change was the root cause, making weather conditions more extreme, increasing the intensity and frequency of heat waves, droughts, and strong winds, factors that transformed ordinary bushfires into an unprecedented catastrophe. This debate also revolved around the Australian government's policies. Many criticized the government for not taking strong enough action to address climate change, particularly its continued reliance on fossil fuels and delays in implementing emissions reduction policies. They questioned the nation's preparedness for increasingly frequent disasters, asking whether there were sufficient resources and awareness to protect its people and environment. The 2019 to 2020 Australian bushfire disaster was not merely a tragedy for Australia alone. It was a global warning, echoing across every continent. It clearly showed us that extreme environmental disasters, from prolonged droughts and devastating floods to unprecedented powerful storms, will become more common and more ferocious if we continue to ignore climate change. This is no longer a distant future problem, but a reality unfolding right before our eyes, demanding urgent attention and action from every individual and every nation on this planet. This warning is not only about the fires, but also about This warning is not just about the fires, but also about the fragility of life, about the thin line between prosperity and disaster that we now face. It is an urgent alarm bell, echoing from the scorched forests, from the crimson skies, from the desperate cries of millions of innocent creatures. Imagine for a moment, amidst the scorching sun and whipping winds, you see thick black smoke billowing in the distance. Then the sky turns orange, then blood red. The air is thick with the smell of smoke, each breath like a knife cutting into your chest. You cannot see the path, cannot find an escape. That is not a scene from an apocalypse movie. That was the reality millions of Australians faced in late 2019 and early 2020. Small fires, seemingly controllable, transformed into megafires, then merged into firestorms, a terrifying phenomenon that horrified even the most seasoned experts. Temperatures soared to unimaginable levels, incinerating everything in their path, turning centuries-old ancient forests into ash in mere moments. Not just trees, but millions, even billions, of wild animals. Iconic Australian species like koalas, kangaroos, along with countless birds and reptiles, were tragically burned to death or completely lost their habitats. Images of severely burned koalas and kangaroos lost in the inferno haunted the minds of millions worldwide, becoming a heartbreaking symbol of the disaster's devastation. This is no longer Australia's story alone. This is the story of Earth, of humanity. The Australian bushfire disaster sounded a powerful warning bell. If we continue to ignore the signs nature is sending, if we do not change our way of life, our production, our consumption, then the worst-case scenarios will no longer be prophecies but will become harsh realities anywhere. It exposes the fragility of ecosystems, the vulnerability of communities to natural forces exacerbated by climate change. In Sydney, Canberra, major cities that seemed safe, the sky turned apocalyptic red. Air quality plummeted to dangerous levels, forcing millions to wear masks, even to stay indoors. Many schools closed. Hospitals were overwhelmed with respiratory illnesses. This was not just a material disaster, but also a severe blow to the morale and sense of security of an entire nation. It could be historical floods in Asia, unprecedented powerful storms in the Americas, or prolonged droughts turning land into desert in Africa. Each extreme environmental disaster is a piece, painting a terrifying picture of a future we are creating with our own hands. And let's not forget, amidst that inferno were people. Thousands of homes were destroyed, turned into rubble overnight. Tens of thousands of residents had to evacuate urgently, leaving everything behind, only managing to take what was most precious, their lives and hope. The Australian Navy had to carry out unprecedented large-scale evacuations, rescuing thousands trapped in coastal towns as roads were completely blocked by fire. The sight of warships becoming shelters for residents with the crimson sky above was a powerful testament to the disaster's ferocity and the spirit of solidarity and mutual aid among people in adversity. And above all, there was the silent sacrifice of the firefighters. They were true heroes who bravely faced death, plunging into the inferno to protect the lives and property of others. Many of them never returned, leaving irreplaceable voids in their families and communities. Their sacrifice was not only a tremendous loss, but also a painful reminder of the price we pay when nature rages. This warning is not just about the flames, but also about a difficult truth to accept. We, as humans, are harming our own home. We are pushing this planet to its breaking point. And when nature retaliates, its power is insurmountable. We can build resilient cities, advance technologies, but we cannot defeat the wrath of a wounded planet. This disaster has forced us to look at ourselves, to re-examine the relationship between humanity and nature. It is not just a climate problem, but also a moral one about the responsibility each of us bears for this planet. The warning has been delivered clearly and painfully. The question is no longer, will this happen? But, what will we do with this message? Will we continue to wallow in indifference, or will we awaken and act to protect our common home? This is the moment for each of us, each nation, each organization, to make a choice. A choice that will shape not only our future, but also that of generations to come. And that choice begins with us acknowledging the painful truth that the Australian bushfire disaster exposed. When the devastating fires were gradually brought under control, not by human will, but by unexpected heavy rains that poured down in early 2020, a desolate and heartbreaking scene unfolded before our eyes. It was a picture of immeasurable loss, a deep scar etched into the soul of a nation, and a harsh reminder to the entire world. Millions, yes, millions of living creatures vanished forever in the inferno. From gentle kangaroos and Australia's iconic koalas to countless species of birds, reptiles, insects, and rare plants, all became victims of the devastation. Scientists estimate this number could be over 3 billion animals directly or indirectly affected, a horrifying figure beyond all imagination. Images of severely burned koalas, kangaroos fleeing in desperation, or once lush green forests now reduced to gray ash, haunted and moved the hearts of millions across the planet. Their habitats were destroyed, food chains disrupted, and fragile ecosystems now faced an unprecedented survival crisis. This was not just Australia's loss, but a loss of global natural heritage. Not only animals, but humans also suffered heavy losses. Thousands of homes were swallowed by the flames, turning the lifelong savings of countless families into ashes in an instant. Communities once deeply connected to nature, to the forests and mountains, now faced the loss of their homes, their memories, and a part of their very lives. Many residents had to abandon their homelands, becoming refugees in their own country, with uncertain futures and compounded grief. Firefighters, heroes who selflessly served their communities, faced challenges that pushed them beyond physical and mental limits. Their sacrifice, along with the unhealing wounds of the survivors, stood as a vivid testament to the disaster's ferocity. When the last flames were finally extinguished with nature's help, an atmosphere of relief mixed with sorrow prevailed. The heavy rain was a blessing, but it was also a reminder of how fortunate we were that nature forgave us once more. However, behind that temporary peace, another storm began to brew, a storm of controversy and confrontation over climate change and government policies. The Australian bushfire disaster became the focal point of a global debate. On one side were scientists, environmentalists, and directly affected residents, tirelessly calling for urgent action to address climate change. They pointed out that prolonged droughts, record temperatures, and unusually strong winds were not random occurrences, but clear signs of a warming planet. They emphasized that if we do not change, such extreme disasters will no longer be exceptions, but will become the rule, becoming more common and more ferocious. But on the other side, there were still voices of denial, delays, and policies that seemed insufficient to address the root of the problem. This debate was not only taking place in international forums and at summits, but also within the heart of every nation and every community. It posed a big question. Do we have the courage to face the truth, to overcome short-term interests and make difficult but necessary decisions for the future of this planet. The Australian bushfires were not just a local event. They were a powerful and painful message sent to all humanity. A warning that climate change is no longer a distant future threat, but is already manifesting right before our eyes with terrible and irreversible consequences. It showed us that no nation, no matter how wealthy or developed, is immune to nature's wrath. And responsibility cannot be placed solely on one individual or one nation. This is the shared responsibility of all of us who coexist on this planet. We have witnessed the devastation, felt the pain, and heard nature's cry for help. Now, the question is no longer whether we believe in climate change, but what we will do with that belief. Can we transform these losses into a driving force for change, to act more decisively and responsibly? Or will we continue to repeat mistakes, pushing this planet to a point of no return? This is the moment for each of us, every small individual, to collectively create a great wave of change, a wave of awareness and action. We cannot bring back the lost lives, nor rebuild the homes burned to ash, but we can. But we can prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. We can protect what remains, and together build a world where humanity and nature live in harmony, respecting each other. This is not a task for any one person, but a shared responsibility for all of humanity. Each of us, no matter how small an individual, has the power to make a difference. From your daily choices, how you consume, how you travel, how you use energy, to speaking out in support of environmental protection policies, all contribute to the larger picture. Think of the firefighters who braved danger, the volunteers who tirelessly helped wildlife, the communities that united to overcome loss. These are testaments to the indomitable spirit, compassion, and incredible resilience of humanity. The Australian bushfire disaster of 2019 to 2020 was not just a dark chapter in Australia's history, but a stark warning to the entire world. It clearly showed us that climate change is no longer an abstract concept or a distant threat. It is a harsh reality knocking on the door of every home, every nation. It is the fierce fires that incinerated millions of hectares of forest, the floods that submerged coastal towns, the prolonged droughts that turned land into desert. And if we do not act now, these extreme disasters will become an unavoidable part of our lives. But do not despair. Hope still remains, and it lies in our own hands. We have a choice. We can continue to turn a blind eye, or we can awaken and act. Let us transform pain into motivation and fear into determination. Let us collectively demand that governments and businesses act more decisively, invest in renewable energy, protect old-growth forests, and implement carbon emission reduction policies with unwavering resolve. Educate yourselves and those around you about the importance of environmental protection. Change your daily habits to minimize our impact on the planet. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. Every seed of awareness planted today will sprout into a forest of hope in the future. We have witnessed the devastation, felt the pain, and understood more than ever the fragility of this planet. Now, let us transform those costly lessons into concrete action. Let us stand together, not just for ourselves, but for future generations, for the innocent lives lost, and for the eternal beauty of nature that we are responsible for protecting. Remember that the power of change originates from each individual, but only when we unite will our voices be loud enough to create an unstoppable wave. Let us together write a new story for Earth, a story of recovery, of sustainability, and of a brighter future, where the green of the forests is never replaced by the red of fire, where the song of birds is never drowned out by the roar of firestorms. This is our moment. Let us act.